Hello, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to our CINAT Junior Scientist webinar. Today, we have our speaker who is Mozhgan Farahani, who's in Dr. Ellison Goodwell's research group at University of Colorado, Denver. And she's going to tell us about ecohydrological models and information flow, how models utilize available information. Okay.
Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here and joining this webinar. My talk today will be about the information flow pathway and how ecological model utilize available information. So the first study is about evaluating ecological model sensitivity to input variability with an information theory-based approach. And in this study, we focus on the impact of forcing precision on ecological model behavior by quantizing time series forcing variables. And we tried to answer questions like, how does a model respond to the precision and variability of forcing data? And especially, how does decreasing precision of individual or multiple forcing variables affect model sensitivity? And the second study is about causal drivers of canopy carbon fluxes from different models. In this study, we address how various model types combined with driving source interdependencies produce a range of information flow pathway from driving source to carbon flux. So we explore a range of behaviors that flux tower measurement, machine learning models, and process-based models exhibit, and how these interdependencies affect model performance. So we are using MLCAM model, which is a multi-layer canopy soil root model that has vertically resolved the canopy radiation, meteorological microenvironment, biochemical process, and leaf level ecophysiological state at multiple canopy levels to simulate canopy atmosphere fluxes of carbon dioxide, latent heat flux, and sensible heat flux. Also, we use Goose Creek flux tower data, which is located at Central Illinois, which is part of the CINAT Critical Interference Network CINAT project. And MLCAN uses forcing data, which includes short wave radiation and long wave radiation, air temperature, vapor pressure deficit, and CO2 concentration, wind speed, air pressure, and precipitation. So the first question that we try to answer is, how does a model respond to the precision and variability of forcing data? Previous ecological modeling studies have focused on model sensitivity to the modeling hypothesis, for example, parameter specification and model structure. And here we consider a model that is constant in terms of structure and parameters and processes, and such that information provided by these modeling hypotheses are conditioned on the nature of the input forcing data and their uncertainties. So here we focus on the response of models prediction to changing forcing data precision to have better understanding of how model use information from data, particularly variability within forcing data. So this aspect of forcing data precision in a complex ecological model is typically dictated by the precision of measurement device, which may vary significantly between data type and instrument. So input variables are usually not represented as continuous, since Measurement instruments typically recorded data discretely to some degree of precision, right? And this makes it useful to define the goodness of representation of data. And we use rate distortion theory, which is a branch of information theory method, to optimally approximate representation of model input variables at different precision. So IT methods have been used in earth science studies to construct ecological process network that reveal ecosystem behavior. And first Quaz Channel founded information theory in 1948. He developed the concept of entropy, a concept of information as entropy, and he defined it as a measure of uncertainty of a random variable, which is computed based is probability distribution function. And information theory provides the theoretical and fundamental limits of data, data compression, representation, and transmission. So here in this study, quantization is a data processing technique that take a large range of values and represent them by a smaller set of values. So especially we quantize input variables to different precision in a way that we can minimize the distortion at a given precision. And this is accomplished by defining a distortion measure, which is a measure of distance between random variables and its representation. So in this method, we start by finding the probability mass function of data set, and then we set some random initial threshold guess for n level of quantization, and these may be any values between the minimum value and maximum value of data. And we consider 2 to 5 level of quantization here. And through this algorithm, we obtain corresponding representation for points for each input variables. And based on the representation point that correspond to our initial threshold guess, we next update the threshold values with a goal to decrease the distortion. And in this algorithm, the quality of quantization can be measured by this distortion of the resulting representation point. So the distortion function is a measure of the cost of representing the x by x hat, which x is the original value of the data and the x hat is its representation point. And we use the expected square error distortion here, which is the commonly used distortion function. And this algorithm iterates through this process, and distortion decreases at each iteration until the threshold converge within the small tolerance. And this figure shows the final representation points for air temperature in the growing season for 2, 3, 4, and 5 level of quantization. As n increase, the forcing data approach to the initial input data. For example, when TA is between the minimum value of temperature and our threshold 23 degrees Celsius, the representation point is 21. And when is greater than this threshold, all of the values of air temperature would be 27, like these figures. So based on this definition of our algorithm, we can now try to answer how does decreasing precision of individual or multiple forcing variables affect model sensitivity. So we demonstrated analytical method to approximate representation of model input variable at lower precision and minimize the complexity of a forcing data set. And we retain the complexity of the model itself and focus on the effect of forcing data complexity. So decreasing precision or size of forcing data result in less memory storage needed, and minimize the impact of instrument noise in the forcing data, which are desirable feature. And additionally, it can help identify model sensitivity and potential structural error to the extent that a model does not take advantage of the full precision of the available input data set. For example, if a decrease in the precision of forcing data variables weakens the apparent source-target relationship in observed data, but does not lead to similar change in model behavior, this would indicate the model is not utilizing the level of detail available in the original forcing data, right? So we defined 7 model cases based on individual or joint quantization of a meteorological forcing variable, temperature, wind speed, and vapor pressure deficit, and a single model case with energy balance forcing variable, RAG, is quantized. As an example where quantization alters the energy balance. We retain all other input forcing data, including air temperature, carbon dioxide concentration, and vegetation indices as their full distribution. And we run the MLCAN model for 100-day period of the 2018 growing season using Creek flux cover data. We use this model to analyze the sensitivity of MLCAN model to different forcing variables. And we find that the model is more sensitive to the precision of energy balance input and less to meteorological input. And there is a difference model behavior between carbon and heat fluxes, in which any level of quantization impacts carbon flux similarly, and a specific level of quantization influences heat flux to different degrees. So the impact of simplifying forcing variables can vary depending on the condition which determine the causal strength of different drivers. And for the conclusion, we find that MLCAN heat and carbon flux are relatively intensive to model meteorological forcing precision, and the model quantized result for quantizing temperature, vapor pressure deficit, and wind speed are typically like those based on the original model result. And the model response to changing the precision of solar radiation showed that heat fluxes shifted to meet the energy balance, and carbon flux had a more nonlinear response that depends on whether quantization increase or decrease the apparent solar radiation. And for the further extension of this study, we can address how model complexity in terms of number of input variables, parameters, or other aspects leads to different response in terms of forcing precision. For example, we would accept a very simple model with few input variables to be more highly sensitive to any change in those inputs. And this method could be used in conjunction with other working hypotheses, for example, parameter, model structure, and process equation, to better diagnose complex model uncertainty. And this method could be applied broadly to other models behind the ecological scope demonstrated here to better understand model behavior and importance of input data at a given precision. So next study was causal drivers of canopy carbon flux from different models. So in a complex ecological system, many nonlinear interaction between atmosphere, soil, and vegetation variables combine to dictate carbon flux from soil and vegetation, right? In this study, we first evaluate the predictability of carbon flux with different available driving source. And we study how simple models, given a certain subset of driving variables, use information in the model and determine the performance level based on how information is used in the model. So our source drivers are a combination of these 18 variables, and the target variable is carbon flux. We measure carbon flux in addition to over 150 other soil, meteorological, and flux variables at 15-minute resolution at Goose Creek flux tower site. So we need to quantitative ways to look at these aspects that I've been talking about. So particularly, we are going to look at measure of information flow, predictive and functional and performance. Well, here, information theory provides a framework for detection of causality to evaluate multivariate connectivity between measured or model time series variables. We focus on reduction in uncertainty or gain in information in the form of mutual information between two variables. Especially, we are concerned with the total information that two sources provide to a target. So in a system where two sources share information with a target, without going to any technical details, that total information quantity can be partitioned into synergic, unique, and redundant type of information or component. So the redundant R is redundant information or information that both sources provide in overlap, and S is a synergistic information or information that is provided only when both sources are known together, and U1 and U2 terms indicate unique information which is provided by either sources. So there are a lot of different ways that we might evaluate a model, and the first thing that comes to mind is predictive performance, which compare the model output with the observed or validation data point, and somehow addresses how well did our model reproduce our observation. And AAP here represent information about the target variable that is meeting from the model output. And another related but different way to look at the model is functional performance, which address how well did our model replicate process or interaction. So the functional performance is more like related to relationship rather than predictive performance. And we are going to use these RS and U information components and different combination of those to look at the model functional performance, which is the difference in an information flow measure for modeled versus observed data. And we have these individual partitioning performance measure, and we can combine them to one big measure of functional performance. So we take those 18 different driving sources and pair them together. And we are looking at source pair and how those source pair provide information to our target of carbon flux. We paired up all of combination of 18 variables in order to pick some top source pair with highest synergic, redundant, and unique information. And this matrix is symmetric with respect to the source. And these are top 6 source pairs with highest synergic information for the entire year, for example. And then we train and run linear regression model based on these top source pair to predict carbon flux. We did the same things in order to find top 6 source pair with highest redundant and unique information for both growing season and the entire area. So in this figure is an example of lots of figures that I have, shows that the functional performance measure in x-axis versus predictive performance in y-axis, and for each categorical based on synergic, redundant, and unique for growing season and entire year. So positive values here of functional performance means overestimation. It means model overestimating the particular information components, and negative values mean underestimation. So in general here, most models are underestimating the redundancy. And I'm kind of think of this as using redundant information uniquely or synergistically. So we can see that the top source with highest redundant information for growing season have better predictive performance. So here, these yellow dots. So when sources are highly correlated, this model achieve better predictive performance by using the overlap in information the source provided. So we find that the top predictor of carbon flux are latent heat and solar radiation in the growing season, which are somehow correlated and provide more redundant information. So this result is just a model performance of a linear regression model that just based on those two sources. And we just pick those sources because they had a particular property. So it's not like that we are looking for the best model or anything, or we are just looking for how different sources combination project themselves into the model. So for the conclusion, while process-based and data-driven models can be used to simulate carbon flux and are validated based on eddy covariance measurement, the understanding of processes, intermediate interaction, threshold, and key differences between models necessitate a causal analysis method. So we evaluate the predictability of carbon flux with different available driving source, found top predictor of carbon flux, and we address how various model types combined with driving source independencies produce a range of information flow pathway from driving source to carbon flux. And particularly, we will try to explore a range of behavior that flux tower measurement, machine learning models, and process-based models exhibit, and how these interdependencies affect model performance. And this study provides insight into the functional and predictive behavior of various model structure under different environmental conditions, and enable better understanding of drivers of carbon flux in an intensively managed landscape. And this method could be applied broadly to identify individual and joint connectivity with a wide range of system models behind the ecohydrological scope demonstrated here. So thanks for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Mozhgan, for your presentation. If anyone has a question, please unmute yourself and ask any questions. I saw Marian raise a hand during your talk. Maybe he has a question. Please.
Yeah, I have a question because I don't know the area, so my question may be naive, but I'm not in this area with my work, but I use Monte Carlo, for example, and then I see your approach in working with the input, and I think this quantification is what distinguishes Monte Carlo from your method. The quantification itself. Mm-hmm. That's what distinguishes you from a Monte Carlo simulation, which basically does the same, works with different PDFs. You have a fixed model parameters and you just run and look at the outcomes, if I am right. No. If you have knowledge and can comment a little bit between
I'm not sure about the Monte Carlo, but which I think is for the Monte Carlo, we just run the model with different range of input variables, for example, but we try to just simplify the input variables. For example, for air temperature, we have a time series with different values. For example, for 2 level of quantization, we just use 2 values of air temperature. For example, for day and night, we just have 2 values of air temperature. We just simplify.
Monte Carlo takes the actual values
Yeah.
and PDFs with parameters defining the distribution, and that's how it runs. But now I understand that you can create this quantification day, night, maybe sub-daily, and looking perhaps at the same. I don't know, Alison, is my question naive or foolish?
No, I think I'm not sure exactly, like on the Monte. Sorry. It's like playing in the sink right now. Yeah, like our question was kind of like, what if the model was only given the information of like, is it hot or cold versus the actual temperature?
And that cannot be quantified with a PDF, right?
Yeah, Daddy went to the grocery. Sorry, I missed that.
And that type of input cannot be quantified with a probability distribution, right? That's what you say.
Like you mean the input? Oh, I mean we're basically it links to the probability distribution. We're just kind of decreasing the entropy of the forcing data in each model run as we like simplify our input data. So we go from, the full distribution of temperature or radiation or whatever, all the way down to basically like, there's only one value of temperature that's input into the model at every single time step. And it's, the model is essentially having to deal with the lack of information that it would have otherwise gotten from knowing the full
which Monte Carlo never assumes that you know exactly what you are talking about. Yeah. Thank you.
Dr. Blair.
Yeah, I'm Mozhgan. I'm really interested in your carbon canopy model. Do you treat soil respiration and photosynthesis as 2 different processes or sources? I didn't quite understand how you're treating the actual carbon. I mean, where is it coming from, and what is the temperature acting on that's giving you your variability?
Actually, I have a flux tower data, and I chose first I calculated the mutual information of all of the variables that I have from the flux tower data, and I chose 18 or 20, whichever you want, variables that are most related to carbon flux from the indices that I choose, for example, mutual information. So I took some of these variables from the flux tower. These variables could be anything, for example, soil respiration. I consider some soil variables in these variables, driving source variables. So these variables could be anything. So, and I'm trying to run lots of others, machine learning models and process-based models based on these top source variables and see what will happen. So it's just the first step of my study for the second study, right?
So do people, or is there a plan to sort of try to separate out the process? So you've got 2 competing processes, and including the wind forcing, which obviously is really important, but you've got soil respiration that's producing CO2. So that's your positive flux up. But if you actually have a plant cover, they're taking in CO2. So they're going to be drawing it down, and they're going to have slightly different forcing. I mean, they're going to respond to temperature and water and so on, and light in somewhat different fashions, particularly light, obviously.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, when one is trying to model like flux tower data, do people get down in the weeds, as it were, and try to separate those 2 parameters out to sort of try to explain the high temporal resolution? Because I think you would need to
Yeah,
ultimately to
exactly.
really get a good fit.
Yeah, right.
I'm kind of curious, and this is going even deeper into the weeds, is could you start collecting state carbon isotope data
Mhm.
of the CO2 and start modeling that? And that would require an understanding of those two sources because they're going to have very different isotope, but it would be a really elegant test of
Mhm.
someone's model if you could reproduce the isotope variability. Allison, you look like you're going to say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I only got part of that, but that's a really like different processes are active at different times, and that's kind of what you've looked at a little bit, I think, with you split out the growing season from other parts of the year, you know, so she's kind of looking at like these
Okay.
are dominant drivers during the growing season, but there's a lot of other really high temporal resolution. Something that we haven't really got to that Mushfiqa is working on is more like the flux footprint type of question, is the wind direction and what is the flux tower actually seeing, and that makes a difference too. So yeah, I think like more detailed aspects of that carbon flux variable are definitely relevant.
What about day night as a simple way of looking at it? That would certainly drop out the photosynthesis.
Right. Yeah, and it might be just more like day with flux tower data. I think there's at night it's kind of the eddy covariance method is not working as well. So it's like that's kind of one of those. Maybe it makes sense to just cut out nighttime and focus on times when you know that photosynthesis is occurring. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Any other questions?